My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Dyer. Today's leadership quote comes from Rosalind Carter. A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but where they ought to be.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Hi, it's episode 53. And here's your host, my dada.
Hey friends, welcome to the Leader Assistant podcast with my friend Cheryl Dyer. She works remotely and is going to share some tips on remote working and also security. She works in the security industry, so stay tuned for some great tips. But first, I wanted to tell you about my sponsor for this episode. Spoonful of Comfort is a unique way to nourish customer and employee relationships with care packages customized with sensational soups, classic cookies, and accessories. You can make a big impression for any occasion. I also like Spoonful of Comfort in these times when many employees and companies are going to remote work, which can be lonely for those, especially extroverted people in our companies that really like being around people, really get energy from being around people. Now they're stuck at home, possibly quarantined with all the coronavirus stuff going on, and remote work is kind of all over the news, and a lot of people are being forced to work remotely. So what I love about Spoonful of Comfort is you can send custom home-style meals by mail that are beautifully packaged and always appreciated. So my idea for you would be, if you know a coworker is working remotely or you know a friend is working remotely, who knows how long they're going to have to do that. Maybe they don't even have an office at home. Maybe they have to throw a desk in their living room, or they have to work from the dining room table. It can be a challenge and also can be isolated and lonely. So I would just encourage you to go to spoonfulofcomfort.com/leaderassistant. You can go on there, order, ship some cookies, some soups, accessories, or if you have somebody that's having a baby and they had to cancel their baby shower because the town's on lockdown with the virus going on. My friends at Spoonful of Comfort have a really unique way to connect with and encourage people who may be stuck at home during the season. So spoonfulofcomfort.com/leaderassistant. Check them out. Try sending a package to a friend that's working from home or they just can't get out right now, and I think it would be very well received and give you a way to simply be generous to those in your world. All right, let's jump into this interview. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Leader Assistant podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and today I'm speaking with Cheryl Dyer from Sophos. How are you doing, Cheryl?
I'm great. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Where are you in the world today?
I am in southern New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia.
Awesome. Well, it's probably similar temperature there then right now than it is here in Missouri?
Well, I don't know. What's it there in Missouri?
Chilly.
I think we saw our first frost yesterday morning, but yeah, it's actually been somewhat nice in the daytime and getting cold at night for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's talk about your very first job. What did you do maybe coming right out of high school, and what skills did you learn in that role that you still use today?
Sure. Well, my first job was actually well before high school. I had 3 of them before I got out of high school. When I was around 10 or 11, I was the first female newspaper delivery person in our town. But at the same time, I was assisting my mom with her Avon products, selling those to friends and neighbors, and then also working as a cashier at a local supermarket.
Awesome.
Yeah, a little busy girl.
Awesome. So I used to do paper routes too. And one thing I learned from paper routes is kind of the art of efficiency.
That's
And
exactly what I was going to talk about.
yeah, yeah. So, you have to figure out what route is. You got to figure out, okay, I got to get these dang papers delivered as soon as I possibly can. What's the shortest way to do that?
Exactly. Yeah, you sort your customer list and determine the route even before you start going door to door. I actually, quote, borrowed a shopping cart from a local supermarket and used those so I didn't have to carry them on my back. Got in trouble for that, but
Awesome. It's resourceful.
But yeah, so I learned that efficiency definitely matters, either in, putting those things in order or by organizing my mom's Avon products as they came in. I would sort them into the appropriate categories so that she could easily pull and supply her customer orders to them.
So when did you kind of make the transition to an EA, or did you start off your career as an assistant?
Yeah, I pretty much started as an assistant. I was very young, and of course, I didn't really go looking specifically to be an assistant straight out. But when I was young, I started out as a receptionist. I saw an ad for a receptionist at a local bank in the newspaper, and mind you, I had zero skills at that age. I was really just looking to get paid somewhere, somehow. But I applied and luckily was able to get that job. I did that job well enough to get myself promoted pretty quickly within the role. Moved into, at that point, a formal assistant role elsewhere in the company. Got promoted shortly thereafter once again. What I realized is that with each position, I would take on each task, do it well enough to make an impact. People would notice. I noticed that they had noticed. And so with each role, I would just work quietly. I would do the job. I would do it a little bit better than the person before me. And that is basically how I sort of propelled the career forward. Although at the time, I would say that I didn't consider it a career. At the time, to me, it was just a job. I knew that college was never going to be in the cards for me. And so instead, I took the route of using all of the internal resources and training that were offered to me. I listened to as many mentors as possible while working, basically, can I say this? Working my ass off. Mm-hmm. It is it's your podcast, so I can say that, right? But yeah, well, working my ass off. And again, at that time of my life, it was just about the money. The harder that I worked, the more money that I would make. And so what I learned is in order to get more money, I just needed to continuously do the job better and more efficiently than the one before, and just keep doing that over and over again as I continue to advance throughout the role into, assistant, and then senior assistant, and then eventually executive assistant. It wasn't actually until after I had been married and I was on more stable ground that I really started to think about what I was doing for my job. And I had never really done much soul searching prior to that. But after a lot of self-reflection during those days, and I did try out other roles, doing some marketing assistant roles and some tech support roles. But what I learned is that I actually really love doing the assistant role. And it was sort of around then when I decided that this is a career and this is what my career is going to be. And it was then that I made the conscious decision to sort of move forward in educating myself better so that I could do this role as an executive assistant better and really grow as a career executive assistant. Yeah.
That's great.
That's where I got to.
So why do you love the role?
There's so many different reasons. I feel that, there's no formal education for being an executive assistant when you're in college. So I feel that what's great is with executive assistants and with assistants in general, we are not necessarily experts at any one particular thing, but instead we are really great at a multitude of things. And that's what this role is, really. It could be, running and organizing staff meetings one day and planning offsites another day. Each task has a multitude of things in it that you need to be really good at. And I just think that the variety of that, and really juggling all of those different things really, for me, is at least what makes the role exciting and keeps me coming back.
Awesome. There's a book called Range by David Epstein. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but his subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And so just what you just said about, EAs being maybe not necessarily specialists in one thing or really, 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 experts in one area, but can kind of cover a broad range of things. Just made me think of that book. It's very, very interesting. I think I haven't actually read it yet. I just interviewed a guy that had interviewed him. And so I was like, wow, this is an interesting subtitle. And so I started looking at it. I was like, I think this is kind of how EAs are. So maybe that's why EAs are awesome.
I'm going to agree with that.
So what's one productivity hack that you can't live without?
Oh, boy. Honestly, I'm so old school that I can't live without my Outlook. I can't live without, I don't have any other tools or apps or whatnot for my task lists. It's either going to be sticky notes on my monitor, but mostly I sort of lay out my tasks right in my calendar. And it makes it easy to just sort of move them to later in the day or to the next day as needed. And I just let them sit when they're completed. I mark them a different color and they just roll. And then I can always look back and see what I did on a particular day.
Can you share a mistake that you've made as an assistant and what you learned from that mistake?
Oh, God. Just one?
Yeah, you've only made one, right?
I've totally only made one. Oh, gosh. I'm going to pull from some archives on this one so that nobody can identify where that happened. But early on in my career as an executive assistant, I think it was my very first executive assistant position, actually, I had to get my boss from Boston to San Francisco. And I did that, except I really didn't pay very close attention to the details in between Boston and San Francisco. And during one of his layovers, he had called me and said, "Do you realize where you have sent me?" And apparently my connecting flights it basically went from Boston to somewhere in Canada to Florida, then to San Francisco. Details really matter. And somehow I didn't get fired. He was actually very kind and allowed me that one big mistake. And let me tell you, I certainly pay attention to those details today.
Wow. Details. So if you had a day where you could go and do anything in the world with unlimited resources, what would you do and where would you go?
I love that question. I'm sad that it's only one day because I can imagine. Honestly, it wouldn't be work-related. I would find myself on some island somewhere and I would explore what it has to offer and, live the culture that is on that island.
Awesome. And then you could do 2 days if you want.
Perfect, because I'll need some time to get there, especially if I send myself to Canada and then Florida first.
Right. So how have you, over your career, how have you grown your skills and, developed new skills?
Again, as I said earlier, really it was just taking every possible opportunity that was available to me during every one of my positions and getting the training that was available, talking to mentors, talking to people doing the role, even talking to the executives that I supported and trying to learn, better and more efficient ways to do the job and to sort of think outside the box and how to add more excitement to what may have at the time been a boring position, to make it a little more exciting, and then grow that way.
So let's shift and talk about security.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about what Sophos is, what the company is, and then let's talk about the importance of security for assistants.
Sure. Sophos is a cybersecurity company. We provide companies with a multitude of services to protect them from all different directions. So the second one, why is it important for assistants to take security seriously? Well, so let me back up a little bit. I was at a conference recently, and the speaker that was there had shared a story. You all might have heard it already. Shared a story about how her company was a recent victim of an attack. What she did after was she spoke to the room, and she had posed the question to the room, has this happened to you? And do you know how to prevent it? I was actually shocked at the silence that was in the room. We heard from a few people here and there. They talked about how they personally knew assistants that had fallen victim to an attack of some sort. One of them even purchasing, $1,500 worth of Amex cards on behalf of the CEO, only to find out later that that wasn't real at all. And then after that, there were literally only 3 people in the room that could actually answer how to prevent it from happening, or what even to look for in order to prevent it. For me, it was really shocking given our role in the companies. For me, working at Sophos and in cybersecurity, I know the risks that are involved and what compromising an executive can have on a business. We can't be fooled into thinking that it's only our executives that are the targets. Assistants are definitely huge targets as well. We hold the keys. We hold the keys to all the information, or at least a lot of the information, both about our companies and our executives. There's so many different ways that an attack can happen on a company. So phishing is probably one of the most common, but also it requires a specific action on the part of the user, and it's one that can actually be really easy to prevent. Mm-hmm. Do a lot of people know what spear phishing is, do you think? Should I?
No, I think let's definitely give us a quick overview of what it is.
Okay, so in short, basically spear phishing, or what you may have heard as just phishing, it's when a cyber criminal sends a customized email or an instant message to a targeted victim that may contain an attachment or perhaps a link to a website, or the context will be compelling enough that it will cause the recipient to reply and share confidential information or passwords, or do something like order Amex cards. Right. And then depending on what the request is and whatever the actions are of the recipient, different types of attacks may take place. But what we should really be aware is that criminals are super, super clever. They're really good at conning people, and they're very, very persistent, and they're actually getting better every day. And that means that as assistants, we really have to be vigilant about constantly screening for these types of scams. They can put you into trouble. They can get your company into trouble. We really just need to be alert and on alert all the time.
And that's phishing with a PH, not phishing with an F.
Exactly. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
So what are a couple of tips that you can share with assistants so that we don't compromise our executive or our company's security?
Yeah. So a few things that you can do. There's so many more, but the short list is, first, just slow down. We're all in such a rush to get through our emails every day that we just forget to slow down sometimes and really question and be alert. Always be alert. Trust your instincts. If an email sounds fishy, it likely is fishy. Do not be afraid to question it. And then really just know the red flags. Some of the things like hovering over the sender's email address. It may say your executive's name, but when you hover over it, the email address is not accurate. Sometimes even now the photo is accurate and the name is accurate. They're doing things now where they can actually mimic photos of who's being sent and come across as a safe email. Other common things are things like typos and grammatical errors, but criminals are actually getting even better. They're starting to use existing emails from companies that you're familiar with and just changing the links out. So sometimes even the grammatical errors are corrected now. The key, though, is that the context will usually be unusual, and what they're looking for may stop you and just give you a moment to pause and question what's being asked for. And one other thing that you can really tell with is if you hover over any links that might be contained in the body, look for HTTPS. That S on the next to the protocol is actually secure, and so that's a good hint that it is likely a secure site that it's sending it to you. But again, not always.
Yeah.
And then one tip of actually for responding to things, if you do happen to get caught in some sort of or fall victim to one of these phishing attacks, something that I do just as a habit is I don't reply to emails, even ones that I think are real. I typically will forward the email, and it forces you to actually type the recipient email information directly in. That way you know it's absolutely accurate. And if you are to fall victim of one of those strange requests, your forwarded email or your replied email is actually going to go to the right person, who's then going to stop you and say, wait, I never sent this to you. So it's just sort of a way to self-check, make sure that you're not falling victim to those things.
No, that's great. That's very helpful. I think that it's definitely critical for assistants to pay attention to the details, just be aware of those types of things. And yeah, it's just, as you said earlier, like criminals are getting a little bit better and more creative, and so we just kind of have to keep up with it.
They really are. And, even for your company, like the assistant or an executive assistant role in the world, it could be, a giant company. It could be a big company like Sophos that already has these tools in place that can help. It has great security products that can help protect the employees and the company as a whole. But it can also be the world where it's just one person that supports 3 executives in a really small company, and they get their IT service from an MSP, which is a managed service provider. Mm-hmm. Don't be fooled into thinking that you're totally secure because you're using an outside IT service, because they're targets just like you're a target. I think that as an executive assistant or an assistant, it might not be part of the typical job description, but you'd be really smart to get ahead of it and be asking your executive questions, asking about security, and making sure that it's a top priority for them, because it will be if you fall victim to it.
That's great. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about working from home. So do you work from home full-time or half the time?
I do. Now full-time.
Awesome. Any tips for working from home, or do you miss going into an office?
I love it. It's not for everybody, for sure. I found that I've been doing it for just over a year now. And I can't imagine myself going back into an office environment again full-time. Mm-hmm. But it's not for everyone. What I would say about that is know yourself and know what kind of environment you need in order to be successful. Things like what time of day are you most productive, and are you self-motivated or not? Because knowing those things and knowing yourself and whether or not you can focus enough to actually work from home are probably the most important decisions when making, or most important thoughts when making the decision to even do it.
What about to executives that are like, no, there's no way you're working from home. We're not going to be able to get anything done.
So there's so many benefits to the company. I think the world is changing, and technology is helping to change it as well. That more and more executives are realizing that trust who they've hired, and trust that they've got an employee that's dedicated and that can do the job. And if they didn't trust in that employee, then they might not have hired correctly in the first place. Mm-hmm. But once they get beyond those barriers, there's so many reasons that this benefits them as well. The employee, again, if it's something the employee truly wants, like for me, I'm happier, I'm calmer, I'm more focused on the job that I'm doing. I'm more readily available to my executive. There's no overhead costs for the company. They don't have to pay for lighting. They don't have to pay for space. And for me, at least, my exec knows that I have all the tools that I need to do my job and to do it well. And I'm happier.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could snap your fingers and instantly give all assistants more of something, what would it be?
So I think if I could snap my fingers, I think I would give them some more confidence in using their own voices. What I mean by that is that for far too long, the term assistant has been perceived as and associated with the term subservient. And as such, I think voices have been quieted or silenced, and they've been deemed as less than important than other roles that are within the organization. And I know you've heard it, Jeremy. You've heard just the assistant far too often.
Yeah.
And so I just see that along with standard duties, list of duties that are copied and pasted onto job descriptions, assistants are given that list that given a list of things that don't quite fit in other job descriptions throughout the office. And they're usually on a job description as other items as needed. And we've been working behind the scenes, quietly completing the list, accepting whatever salary has been offered and saying yes to every task that's been assigned without question and without negotiating. Now, what I'm going to say is probably going to get political. It's probably going to become a much longer discussion than what we have time for today. But for me, I think that the Me Too movement has opened up doors wider than anyone could have anticipated. We aren't just talking about harassment or equal pay anymore. Though those are still extremely important, I think that movement has also slowly pushed others everywhere to stand up for themselves. And I think that assistants are no different. We can already hear assistants clearing their voice, clearing their throats, and starting to speak up. And I was saying to you earlier, I was listening to your podcast for previous ones, and the number of assistants that are just starting to speak up for themselves, realizing how much of an impact that they have and just how important the role is to the success of an executive in their company. It only makes sense that we help others find the confidence to use their voices as well. Let's be real. Great executives can't do their job without an assistant. And the really great ones actually encourage their assistants to speak up. They bring them to the table, and they respect them and value them as members of the team.
So tell me about a story or a time where you saved the day in your role as an assistant.
Actually, I have a really funny one, and sort of one on the lines of, did I really just make that happen? So 10 or 15 years ago, I worked in this, actually it was probably 10 years ago, I worked in a complex of several office buildings. They probably had, a few thousand employees, but all of the buildings were connected by one street. So it was one way in and one way out, and they all had to go through one stoplight. And honestly, it took forever just to get out of the parking lot. People were constantly frustrated. I remember, we had snow days, and, you'd go sit in your car and warm up your car while you were waiting to get out of the parking lot. It was crazy. But I remember walking through the break area during lunchtime, and there were a group of people sitting at a table complaining about how long it was just to get through the stoplight. And as I passed through, someone jokingly shot over at me and said, "Hey, Cheryl, you fix everything. You think maybe you can get that light fixed?" So I laughed, and I was, I chuckled away at it. I walked through the kitchen, and as I was walking back towards my desk, I thought, well, could I? Is that even something that could be possible? And so, believe it or not, I called up the city traffic and lighting department, and I just asked. I just explained the situation and just asked. And I really had no expectation that they were actually going to do it. I thought they were just going to laugh me off. But I remember thinking that something my grandmother had always said to me that always plays in the back of my head during these weird situations. And it's really that the answer is always no, unless or until you ask. And so I asked, and they fixed it. And they actually fixed it like by the following Monday.
Wow.
I ask. It was one of those times that you're shocked that it could be done, and it was as simple as just asking the question.
That's great. Well, Cheryl, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of your story and your tips on security and other topics. So I'm really excited to share this with my listeners. So is there somewhere we can find you online or support what you're up to?
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me on. I can be found on LinkedIn and Instagram. I really don't have any other sightings out there in the social world just yet.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes so people can find you and reach out and say hi. And yeah, thanks again, and enjoy your work from home gig and your dogs. I don't know if your dogs are sleeping or...
they're sound asleep at my feet, and I've been fearful of either one of them snoring during this entire time.
Nice.
They've been very good, though.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to Cheryl for some great tips on security, remote work, and much, much more. Check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/53. leaderassistant.com/53. Have a few extra bonus tips on working remotely in the show notes, so check those out. And then, as a reminder, check out Spoonful of Comfort at spoonfulofcomfort.com/leaderassistant. Thanks, and we will talk to you next time.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com